Welcome to Insatiable, the podcast where we discuss the intersection of food, psychology, and culture.
Sadly, your OBGYN is about as equipped to give you menopause advice as your orthopedic is to give you nutrition advice. And so we just need to kind of accept the fact that we're not demonizing doctors, but this whole menopause space, because of the control of medical societies, because of the control of the FDA, because of the control of pharmaceutical companies, because of the control of the insurance regulatory platform, et cetera, they are hogtied as to what they even know about menopause hormones and HRT. And so you probably have to opt out of the system a little bit.
I'm your host, Ali Shapiro, an integrated health coach, 32-year and counting cancer survivor, and have radically healed my relationship with food and my body. And for the past 17 years, I've been working with clients individually, in group programs, and in company settings to do the same. Welcome. The information in this podcast should not be considered personal, individual, or medical advice. Hello, insatiable listeners. Ali with a cold here. Essa brought it home from daycare and had it for about a day and then gave it to me. And here I am 6 days later. So excuse the congestion, but I have a great episode for you today. Before we get there, happy fall equinox to everybody. Or if you're in the Southern Hemisphere, spring is on the way. But you will be listening to this the week of the equinox when it gets released. Well, you may be listening at a different time, but you know what I'm saying. So just want to acknowledge the fall season. It's my favorite time of the year. My birthday is October 1st. Essa's is the 28th. My dad's is the 29th. A lot of my friends are in October. I just think it's the best month. So a couple things before we get into today's episode. I want to thank everyone who has left reviews. If you remember, I had a goal of 200 by the end of summer. We're at 196. Okay. So everything takes you longer than you think it is. So still gunning for that 200. And I want to read some of the recent ones that people have left. So Carrie SSSS says, a great resource for midlife women. I came across Ali's podcast last year when I was looking for ways to become healthier. My metabolism slowed down in my late 30s and I needed insight and guidance. I've learned so much already about nutrition, behavior, and different approaches to feeling better inside and out. Thanks, Ali. And Carrie gave us 5 stars. Jess Pico also gave 5 stars. So many aha moments listening. Ali presents information in a way that reframes a lot about health and wellness and makes you think differently. I've had so many aha moments listening where things click. We've been told a lot about these topics, and Ali does a great job navigating you through all of it. It's one of the few health podcasts that doesn't make me more anxious about health or make me feel there's an overwhelming amount I need to do to claim my health. She focuses so much on getting to the basics in a way that really isn't basic. And from SJNTHEB, she writes an interesting perspective and 5 stars too. After a lifetime of struggling and success and then not success with an abstinence program, Ali's perspective gives me hope. I've struggled with so many, quote, programs because they ultimately don't resonate with what I know to be true in my deepest self. I look forward to continuing to hear her work and see how it works for me. So we're 4 away from my goal. If you have ever gotten something from this show and have yet to leave a review, please do. It literally takes less than 30 seconds, and it is a huge way to help the show, and there will be a link in the show notes. And speaking of reviews and kind of voting, remember, if you're in the States or if you're an American citizen abroad, that we have a very important election coming up. And if you could see my eyes, eye roll, some people have mysteriously been taken off the voting rolls. Okay, and mysterious is where I might roll my eyes. But I just want to make sure that you know if you're registered to vote. I know here in Pennsylvania, we have till the end of October. I'm already registered to vote, have never missed an election my entire life. I think it's really important. It's a part of a healthy democracy. Democracies take work. So voting is a privilege, and I want it to be one you don't take lightly. So I will include a link to vote.org, which is a nonpartisan nonprofit to help you ensure that you're registered to vote. And if not, they'll show you how to do it. It's really important. Okay, now on to the show today. So it is just crazy to me that in the last few years, the menopause space has completely blown up. I mean, I went through it myself just 4 years ago, and I had to piece together so much. And in that time period, woo, right? I'm almost glad that there wasn't as much because it can be so overwhelming, right? I think everybody who has been around a minute understands that you need protein, you need to lift, and you need to get sleep, right? So, but there's a lot of other information out there. And frankly, a lot of it isn't that great. People claim, I'm like, okay. However, I think there's a lot of great stuff that we covered on Insatiable earlier that helps you understand the fundamentals. So definitely look at some of those past episodes that started with me talking about my story and how I gained 30 pounds, combination of postpartum, but it was just a real shock to me because insomnia was my main symptom and I didn't know that was a symptom at the time. But those 7 episodes, the midlife reckoning, they're what I wish that I would probably known at 40, not when I was in the thick of it. And those episodes really go over the fundamentals. And then once you get the fundamentals, you can fine tune. And that's why in this episode, I wanted to have on Kristin Johnson and Maria Claps of Wise and Well, who wrote the new book that is out now, The Great Menopause Myth, The Truth on Mastering Midlife Hormonal Mayhem, Beating Uncomfortable Symptoms, and Aging to Thrive. It is out now. I cannot recommend it enough. It is really looking at menopause, not just through symptom management, but the health effects of it. And they lay it all out in their book so well. I mean, even our hearing, our teeth. I've had so much extensive and expensive dental work in the last 2 years because of 2 teeth infections. And I am now thinking it's because of menopause and how it changes our microbiome in our mouth. But we'll get more into that. And their book gets more into it. But Kristin and Maria have been in this space before it became trendy. And, we all need to start out somewhere as practitioners. But when you're new to something, you often don't have quite the discernment that people who've been around for a while have. And Kristin and Maria had that discernment. And they work with midlife women who want to optimize their chances for healthy longevity and have a special knack for focusing on the basics, plus a little extra. But what I love is they help women avoid distractive and expensive, shiny objects. This happens in the wellness space. The fundamentals are hard to do, right? Getting sleep, getting sunlight, eating mostly whole foods, walking, all these things, they take effort, right? They're not quick fixes because our lives are not set up for health. But then we end up spending money on stuff that distracts us from this. And then we're like, I'm doing all the things, but we're not doing the things that really move the needle. And so that's a lot of their message. But they have discernment about when do the extras really help. So I love that they understand what is essential. And they balance this wonderful line too, that I think is really hard in this space, is that you are going to age and you're not going to look like you're 25. I know some people are trying to, and that's okay. No judgment. This culture is brutal on aging women. And so they're going to be like, look, you have to be realistic, right? And the current expectations for women health are so low, it's outrageous. And in their book, they get into, and we talk about it a little bit more today, the difference between health span and lifespan. And I think that's a really important term to understand. But there's 2 other reasons I wanted to have them on was they understand how the North American Menopause Society is funded, right? There isn't a lot of expertise to guide us. So it can be really easy to go to the one place that is giving us information. But we talk about why it's really important to understand who funds NAMS and why they're not big fans of it, frankly, and why it really matters for your approach to aging to have this understanding. Part of what really fired me up early in my career was how corporate interests dictated my health options. I didn't know that. I just thought, hey, these are the options. I didn't know what I didn't know. But understanding this political corporate interplay really made me realize that, most of the solutions out here are Band-Aids and trying to put out fires. And we need that. And there's a whole other side to the continuum. It's also why I built questioning authority into my work. Because while these organizations can be helpful, I never want you to take what anyone says, especially these big organizations that are so heavily funded by those with profit interests, as the answer. I mean, I even look at discernment with the American Cancer Society, right? I mean, they've just recently, I think, come out about nutrition being helpful in cancer prevention, right? It's like, what? Okay. Second, I really wanted to talk to them about their approach to HRT, hormone replacement therapy. We'll get into it because let's just say that their approach is a little bit controversial. And it's controversial because there isn't enough science accumulated for more traditional practitioners, shall we say, to be comfortable with it. But the science also doesn't exist because it hasn't been researched, right? It's not like they've researched this stuff and they're like, no, the way that they talk about HRT doesn't work. It just hasn't been researched. So I wanted to ask them how they balance this because they are very research based, especially because, 20 years ago when I went to reverse my own IBS, acne, and depression via blood sugar balance and gut health, it wasn't, quote, proven by science. Yet it made logical sense and worked for me, right? This was 20 years ago. People still believed depression was a serotonin deficiency. And I found budding research that said, hey, first of all, depression can be caused by multiple things. It's not always the same in everyone. And it might be an inflammation issue, right? This was radical at the time. But I'm so glad I didn't wait for the science to prove it. I don't know where I would be. Now, of course, there's a ton of research to prove some of what they're talking about, but they talk about where they've learned their approach to HRT. And I think I want all of us to remember that at its best, science is a continuing search for knowledge. The science is rarely settled. So understanding this often opens us up to trusting in our own experience if we understand science is a continuing quest for knowledge and perhaps apply to this episode what sort of HRT options we want to explore. Okay, almost onto the show. First, a quick bio. Maria is a FDN practitioner, and Kristin is an NTP Board Certified in Holistic Nutrition. And they are plainspoken friends and practitioners who share a passion for women's health, especially women's health at midlife. They are the authors of the widely acclaimed book, The Great Menopause Myth, a comprehensive science-based yet easy-to-read guide for women who want their best chances at healthy longevity. As both of themselves menopausal, they refine the art and science of thriving as a midlife woman based on both clinical and personal experience. They combine individualized nutrition and lifestyle changes tailored to midlife women's needs with mindset coaching, lab testing, and hormone replacement therapy education to help women thrive. Enjoy the show today and let me know what you think. Kristin and Maria, thank you both so much for being here. I have read your book, The Great Menopause Myth, The Truth on Mastering Midlife Hormonal Mayhem, Beating Uncomfortable Symptoms and Aging to Thrive. And I feel like this book is right on time. Although I wish I would have found it 5 years ago when I was going through early menopause, but I guess we'll trust in timing. So thank you for being here.
Thanks for having us.
I want to start with, how did you find yourself writing this book? Right? There's so much about menopause out here. Writing a book is a labor of love. It's not something that you're just like, oh, I want to write a book. It's a real commitment. So how did you find yourself writing this? What are your stories?
The funny thing is the book found us, to be perfectly honest. Maria she kind of had this list of things that she's like, I want us to do a TED Talk, or I want us to write a book. And she kind of had these like aspirational things. And I was like, girlfriend, we're so busy. We do not have the time to do this, and we'll get there. Was kind of our attitude. And then, the world of publishing, we weren't that familiar with. We had a lot of peers in this space, in the industry, just generally of, holistic health practitioners who'd self-published. And so we understood, that kind of path to getting published. But we just, again, weren't putting a lot of attention and time into, knowing more of our options. But in traditional publishing, what they do now is it used to be they got approached with a book proposal and then they'd sort of review it and then they decide if they want to do it. Publishers don't work that way any longer. They actually look at sort of the landscape of what's trending, what's kind of forecasted to trend. Then they identify as a corporate team where and what subjects they want to have an imprint in. And then they go and approach people after kind of surveying the landscape and saying who might be positioned to do this. So that's how we got approached. And to be perfectly honest, we actually said no to start because we were too busy. And Maria and I just sort of naively thought, well, we'll just tell them like in September. Yeah. just like 6 months, no problem. Just wait. And they were pretty blunt. They're like, no, you're not getting it. We're getting a book in this space and it's happening now, or it's not you. And we were like, oh, well, that changes things because, and this kind of goes to some of the stuff we were talking about before we started, which is this is a huge groundswell around menopause. We totally understand it. We're glad for the better attention to it. We're not so thrilled with sort of the pivot of a lot of new menopause experts, OBGYNs and different doctors who just 2 years ago were handing out birth control pills as hormone replacement therapy or telling women to white knuckle it through. Suddenly they're your girlfriend and they're suddenly the menopause expert. And what Maria and I get frustrated with is they don't have a ton of experience in the space. And so they lack a lot of nuance. So they're saying things to women that unfortunately it's just starting to make it very noisy again. And it's hard for women to sort of dissect what's helpful, what's adequate, what's not. And that's where we just were like, okay, gosh darn it, we're going to have to do this darn book now. so we ended up, kind of pitching a revised timeline to the publisher. It really only changed things by about a month, but it allowed us to get our ducks in order. And so that's what we did.
Well, that's so interesting from there's a market need, right? Because it tells me that the market is starting to mature. And so we need more mature conversations, right? Like, the customer journey is now not just like, to your point, like, okay, I'm just going to take birth control to manage my symptoms. And we'll get into kind of the two camps I love that you lay out. But I think that's hopeful. And it's also overwhelming if you're probably just entering the space. You're like, I'm not a mature customer yet. I'm just like, I know for me, I was like, I'm just not sleeping and I had a newborn. So I was like, maybe it's that. Like, I was just like, what is happening? Right. So hopefully people coming in now have an easier time. But I think one of the common pain points I hear from my clients and listeners is just like overwhelm. And so what I love about your book is it's clarifying what's essential and what we need to know. So I love that someone on a corporate team had some good instincts because often corporate's a little behind the times, but it sounds like you're in good hands. So speaking of kind of this groundswell of menopause, I love how in your book you lay out that there's two camps. You say there's one camp where menopause is a time for empowerment and rejection of this patriarchal menopause is pathological. We should be invisible, right? And then the other camp is like, embrace your aging, focus on your innate wisdom while letting the symptoms pass. And my work, it's all about finding a third option, right? So I call it option C out of the binary thinking. And I love that you said there's this third camp we should consider, which is menopause can be an amazing time and nothing about menopause makes women healthier. Can you unpack that third statement? Nothing about menopause makes women healthier.
Well, when you realize that when you lose hormones, you're not just losing a menstrual cycle. And that's unfortunately what so many women kind of equate menopause with is I don't menstruate anymore. Obviously, what comes with that is I can't get pregnant. And, whether or not they ever say wanted children, most women absolutely celebrate the end of their menstrual cycle. And when you understand that that signifies hormone loss and how significant those hormones are for health and vitality at every stage of life, even after they are gone, even though it's natural, you don't celebrate that. So that's underlying what we say, nothing about menopause makes women healthier. And I mean, I have gotten a little bit of pushback on that. And one woman was like, well, I don't have my flooding periods and anemia anymore. I'm like, okay, again, I understand you thinking that that makes you healthier, but there was a reason for that when that was happening as well. So the absence of it doesn't mean you're healthier.
Yeah, and the statistics play out. I mean, we know that women are living longer, and this just goes to a lot of people are like, this women are outliving menopause is bunk. There's a kind of influencer out there who likes to say that, like, no, we just, suddenly it's now a problem. Like, no, actually, if you look at the statistics of lifespan, we were dying shortly around the time of menopause in the early 1900s. So, fast forward 125 years, here we are, and women are living 20, 30 years of their lives within the menopause paradigm. How are we living that life? We're living it fairly unhealthfully. And that's one of the problems, that women are sort of, being told this is just natural part of aging. Well, okay, is it natural at 70 to be on 12 different prescription meds? Is it natural to need to have a statin, an anti-anxiety med, a sleep medication, a bone builder, and all of these things? That might be normal, but that's not natural either. And so we have to kind of dial back this whole notion of, women that don't want to do HRT because they want to do it naturally. I'm like, well, how natural are all those prescription meds?
Yeah. Well, in your book, I love how you laid out. I mean, because I came into this, I would say like, I'm through menopause. I recovered from what I didn't know and being postpartum at the same time and all this stuff. But I was even connecting. I have never had really teeth problems before. And then I had an infection in a tooth and then it spread and I go to a biological dentist. They don't do root canals. So I'm like, oh my God, is this like $12,000 that I just spent to have these teeth, like, implant and crown? Because you talk about like our microbiome in our mouth changes, our hearing. Like, I think what I love about your book and what I'm always trying to do in my work with my clients is developmentally get them to be like, there's not this all knowing authority out there. There are experts, but you have to advocate. And I think your book in the beginning just like lays out the dilemma that we're facing as we age. And I love in the book how you bring up like, hey, before menopause, women are like so much healthier than men, but then 10 years out, it is the opposite. Well, I don't know if it's the opposite, but how would you explain like what happens?
It's the opposite. I mean, men aren't getting autoimmune diseases at the same rates. They're not getting dementia at the same rates. They're not getting osteoporosis at the same rates. We catch up with them and ultimately surpass them in heart disease. I mean, it's not a fallacy. Like, we truly are. And the statistics show that if you took, centenarians and you're saying, okay, we've got these 100-year-old men and women. So men who managed to live to 100 and women who are at 100, who's healthier? It's the men every time. So this isn't, something that's kind of being concocted. The data is there, and women's health span has suffered, notwithstanding benefiting in a longevity and lifespan.
So I will throw this in, and Kristin, I'm not sure if I mentioned this to you, but I know you're going to agree with me, and I know this is just anecdotal, and this is just a visual kind of representation of what Kristin just said. But I've been noticing, say, male and female pairs that are, for better or for worse, I'm thinking they're husband and wife, or they're partnered, right? And they're probably not brother and sister. And I have been noticing that they're probably age matched, or we'll say closely age matched, right? The man, or I would say the woman, sometimes looks like the man's mother as they age. And again, this is not shaming women for their looks. It has to do with the aging process in the body. And yes, before anyone attacks me, we're all going to age. We will all show visible signs of aging at some point. But there is an acceleration for women of aging when the hormones decline, when the ovaries are no longer producing robust amounts of estradiol and progesterone. So that has been, again, I feel like I've known this theoretically for a while, but like I'm visually noticing it. And it's just kind of a reminder of the importance of hormones.
Well, and I'm thinking too, because I know at least with like my mom and dad and my husband and I, like I'm the one that's healthier too. Like I'm always the one trying to get them to be healthy. So to then see that kind of contrast, right? It's like, what's happening? The fact that women in general, and I'm making mass generalizations here, but what I've seen anecdotally is women tend to take better care of themselves all along. And then so to see that drop off, it makes you wonder even more, like what's happening.
I think a lot of women don't understand too that men don't lose their hormones at the same time as women or at the same rate as women. So we have a fairly precipitous drop off of our progesterone and our estrogen starting between 35 and 55. I mean, one of them drops about 25%, the other one drops about 75%. So we, by 55, which I hope none of us here would even consider that old, right? Because that's where Marie and I are. But, it's still a youthful time of life. And yet from kind of a physiologic standpoint, it entails significant aging of body functions. Whereas men, they're holding on to their primary hormone, testosterone, well into their 70s. So we've got this like 20-year gap between hormone loss of the sexes. And unfortunately, that starts getting reflected in how we're living and how we're aging.
And I love in your book how, because I mean, I do want to sort of go down the hormone path, but I love in your book that I I was like, oh, they're bringing nuance. You do talk about how like the stress and how diet and lifestyle and how the stress can ultimately like lead to kind of this acceleration in everything. So it is the hormones, but it's also the physiological effects that they create that then make us perhaps, I know for me, like not sleeping. It's like, and then you don't really like feel like cooking. And then you're like, oh, like it can be this spiral. So it's all the pieces, but the underlying mechanism of action, I guess you're saying, is the decrease in hormones that kicks all of this off. Again, what I loved about your book was you talk about the hormonal decline, but you bring the other pieces in of sleep, nutrition, exercise. Because when you open up the Instagram, oh my God, I'm calling it like the Google, the Barnes and Noble. I'm not generation.
It's okay. Don't be a boomer. No.
The Instagram, there just seems to be a lot of people acting like HRT is kind of this magic bullet. And I know that a lot of people who have listened to some of my previous podcasts, they get on HRT and they're like, it has helped with certain things, but it's like, oh, I still need to be doing all the other things. So I just love that your book emphasizes that because I don't feel like it's getting emphasized in the space right now.
Yeah, we say that you really should not put HRT into a body that's not prepared for, that is at least reasonably healthy. That means like having a bowel movement every day, eating well, sleeping, yes, or if you can't sleep, which is always an understandable thing, at least you have sleep hygiene into place, right? You're not someone who's staying up till, midnight and scrolling your phone and stuff like that. Those things all do factor in. And Allie, as far as those women who are like, oh, I did HRT and it helped with some things, yes, there's several reasons for that. One of those things is like lifestyle, right? The lifestyle things are still very impactful. But another reason is a lot of women are on really substandard HRT regimens as well. So that's a completely different topic, but I just wanted to throw that in there.
Well, I would like to talk about, that's a great segue of my sense. And again, I've only been paying attention to this for like 4 years and I was only sleeping for 2 of them. So it all gets kind of jumbled. But my sense is there's this kind of sort of camps forming around the HRT discussion. And it's part of why I wanted to have you on, because I think you're offering this third way, is that like there's many providers who still think it causes cancer. And then there's others who are embracing more of this like symptom management. And then I feel even a few less even understand the health benefits. So they still prescribed under the symptom management philosophy, which is kind of lowest dose possible. And what I really appreciate about your book and your work is you understand the historical, political, and profit motivated intersection of why people think this way. And for listeners, when you have this lens, you start to realize that science isn't this like absolute certainty that we all want it to be, right? We know in theory, science is a continuing quest for knowledge, but you start to understand how the science could go down one path and maybe perhaps not other paths. So for example, you taught me in your book that why pharmaceuticals fund the North American Menopause Association, known as NAMS. And they've done a great job of trying to discredit compounding pharmacies, which you'll need if you want that more tailored approach, and traditional perhaps isn't working for you, like Maria said, is maybe you're on suboptimal. So a lot of people listening on this podcast are very open to HRT. And yet what most people hear and are open to are the lowest dose possible, and maybe for symptoms, or are comfortable with staying on them continuously, until further notice. So in your book, you lay out the option of physiologic doses, which means hormones at the level of when we were menstruating, and rhythmically, meaning not set it and forget it, but rather mimicking the cycling of progesterone, especially like when we were menstruating. Is that an accurate assessment I made of?
It's close. Yeah, you did really good on almost all the points, but rhythmic really responds to both estrogen and progesterone, or corresponds to that. What we're saying is anyone could pull up on, Dr. Google, a graph of the menstrual cycle and the hormone release over the course of the menstrual cycle. As anyone will see, it's not like, oh, the ovaries release something and then we have this nice steady level over 28 days. Instead, we have this very kind of peaks and valleys and rhythmic dance that happens for each of the hormones over the 28-day cycle. And that peak and valley, that rhythm that they all have is relevant biologically to women. And that's what a lot of women don't understand, is that it's not going to be optimal to just put some hormones in the tank and think that this particular level or whatever is sufficient, because we didn't do that when we were younger. Both we didn't do that as cycling women, but also if you were a younger woman, say 33 years old, and you lose your cycle, they don't just tell you live with it. This low level of hormones is biologically has some imperatives and it puts her at risk. And so they restore her hormones to what? They restore them to her premenopausal levels. That's not just so she can get pregnant. They do this whether you're interested in having children or not. So if we recognize that when we're younger, that levels of hormones and the way we give the hormones matter, why do those same things not matter when we're postmenopausal? And so that's what we're trying to get women to kind of recognize, is that it's not just having hormones, it's having the right hormones at the right times and the right levels. Because those peaks and valleys, they were catalysts for things. We have bone remodeling that depends upon this sort of handoff between estrogen and progesterone. We have our vascular arterial maintenance depends on that. Our tau protein deposition and clearance depends on that. Our P53 tumor suppressor in cancer, highly dependent upon that. We need a peak of estrogen, not just a level of estrogen, in order to achieve some of these biological things. So that's what we're trying to get women to see, is that when they say HRT didn't work for me or HRT didn't do it all, yes, there are things in your control. And as Maria said, healthy vessel, healthy hormones, you need to take intentional actions in your daily habits to create an environment for the best HRT experience. But then your HRT, it's not the same for each woman. I mean, it's not this standardized compound, pull a bottle of Advil off the shelf and we all take 100 milligrams. This is about saying, your HRT experience is going to be dependent upon the level of hormones you're given, the way in which you're given them, the manner in which they, cycle or don't cycle against one another, etc. And we just posit that if you look at the premenstrual cycle, why isn't that our guide for our HRT cycle?
And how did you guys start thinking about it this way? Because again, I follow you guys on Instagram and your Instagram is great. Like, it's very informative. And I approached my doctor at the midlife center here at the hospital, about like, hey, what about these physiologic rhythmic doses? She's like, I've never heard of that. And then someone else was like, there's no research, right? And I'm used to, like, as a first generation childhood cancer survivor, I'm used to having to like piece together my own health, right? So I'm just curious though, how you came to think about this way, because it is out of the box, right? A different way of thinking about it.
Yeah, I mean, it's the clinicians in the field who have been doing this for 3 decades. And that's the thing, is you're going to hear there's no research behind it. Well, we do have the human female body's entire life experience to have the research behind it. But we also do have clinicians who've been dosing and using HRT in this particular regimen for over 30 years. And so there's this unbelievable wealth of clinical outcomes. I would say that you really don't have to look much further than, say, like the 63-year-old woman who was put on a patch at 50 when she went through menopause. So she's had hormones and she's had HRT, right? And whether she's cycling her progesterone or not, meaning she's taking it 2 weeks of the month instead of all 4 weeks of the month, really doesn't matter. She's got this HRT. And then she gets diagnosed with osteoporosis. And she's like, whoa, wait a minute. I have been doing HRT. I've even been resistance training. I've been doing all the things and I've had hormones in the tank. And it goes to show it's not just having hormones in the tank. It's having the right levels of hormones in the tank. And, we'll see it with changes in blood pressure. We see it with changes in lipid clearance. So there's all of these things that we don't relate to hormones, so that we can have these people who've been on this low dose kind of NAMS prescribed regimen who aren't really thriving, but they kind of dismiss it as aging, right? And they accept it as okay. And Maria and I are saying, actually, if you look at the women who take physiologic levels of hormones, they're not having those same health outcomes that the women who are on lower hormones. And that's not to say everyone has to do it, this is where Marie and I are trying to make the point in the book, just be an informed consumer, right? Know what you're being offered, know what you want. And if those two things don't match up, find another provider.
Yeah, I love how in your book you're like, there's no right or wrong. Because I always said that to my clients. I'm like, everything's about a risk profile, like pros and cons. And so, what do you think someone pushing back on this idea? And again, I'm really curious about this because, again, I knew to heal my gut 20 years ago and there was not all the data that we have now. But I was like, this just makes sense. And if I would have waited 20 years, I would still have IBS and depression and be emotionally eating, And then I think of like when my son was born, we didn't do those like antibiotic eye droplets. And then it's like now, last year, the APA, American Pediatrics Association, came out and was like, we should probably be more discerning with this. So I'm just curious what might be some of the risks of doing it this way that people may want to know about. And again, in your book, you lay it all out. And I love that you're like, there's no right or wrong, just no. But what are some of the things that there might be concerns about doing it this way, or the arguments, whether they're founded in research or not?
The main concern from the point of the safe physicians is that if a woman is doing cyclic progesterone, the goal is actually to have a withdrawal bleed, is to have a period-like bleed, right? And doctors have already decided for women that you don't want it and they don't want it. So we would say that's a pretty big part of the resistance to this. I would say another risk, I say that very, very tongue-in-cheek, is that it could stimulate fibroids. It's not a guarantee. So there could be heavy periods, because when we do have this withdrawal bleed, it is supposed to be easy. Like sometimes women hear, oh, I'm going to have a period. Like, why the hell would I want to bring that back? My periods were miserable. It's not supposed to be that way. If it is that way, you've got work to do with your prescribing practitioner in terms of adjusting the hormones or investigating the causes why. So it isn't for every woman. It isn't, but it is something that we want to make available. It's for women to learn about.
Well, I was going to say, you just mentioned the point about the APA kind of shifting its stance on just the eye drops.
There's a lot of other things I have not listened to with them, but that's the one I'm willing to disclose on air.
Yeah. Totally respect that. But it goes to the point that even today, with all the information that we have, they're still kind of reevaluating some of these standard conventional practices. And I would say women need to understand that 125 years ago, it was seen acceptable, normal, and natural to restore a woman's hormones after menopause, because it was accepted by every major medical society, American Cancer Society, American Heart Association, like everything, that menopause posed a severe risk to diseases of aging, and that hormone replacement therapy could and should be used as preventative medicine. So we had decades where this was actually the standard of care. Now, why did we get derailed? Well, there's some bad studies out there. There's also pharmaceutical interests, because the reality is that to individualize and personalize hormones for women, we can't be dependent upon commercial products. Commercial products are going to be standard, single dose, one size fits all sort of thing. So we need to have compounded medicine in order to, really individualize women's hormone care. Compounded medicine is wildly attacked. There might be people here saying, isn't it dangerous? No, it's not dangerous. In fact, they are highly regulated. A lot of NAMs and conventional docs want to say compounded medicine is dangerous because it doesn't have FDA approval. Well, okay, we won't get into the whole how valuable is FDA approval, because we all know some drugs on FDA approval lists that have killed people. But, FDA approval is not actually entirely incorrect when it comes to compounded hormones, because the constituent ingredients, the medical pieces of the hormones themselves, are FDA approved. The sourcing is FDA approved. There is incredible intense regulation from both state pharmaceutical boards as well as federal agencies. They have to follow certain practices, et cetera. So it is a highly regulated thing. Have there been a couple bad actors out there that, sort of fed into this negative connotation? Yes, there have been, but we could say the same for drug companies. Let's be honest. So why is any of this even relevant? It's because compounded hormones are not patentable. When we don't have a patent, we don't have profit, folks. And so at the end of the day, there's been this sort of movement to suppress compounded medications and individualized medicine because of the lack of money-making opportunity. They'll spin it as because of the lack of oversight by the FDA, but the reality is it's really about kind of taking money out of the pockets of the pharmaceutical companies. And that's not to be conspiratorial. That is just fact. It's an unfortunate reality of our medicine system. So I think, when people then say, but there aren't studies. Well, again, who funds studies, right? There's a financial interest behind most studies today. And that's just also a sad reality of our modern life. So when we don't have studies, it's partly because we can't be giving compounded hormones in a study because compounded hormones have been poised as dangerous. So we're never really going to see anything like this. Now, there is a grant application at the NIH that looks as though it's going to get approved and very promising, that is actually going to finally take compounded medicine dosed in a physiologic manner, which means replicating that cycle of the ebbs and flows, cycling progesterone, et cetera. And they're going to put it head to head against the standard of care, which is a patch and prometrium. And, everyone gets the same thing. And it's going to be eye-opening because they're looking at really important things, hippocampal volume of the brain. They're looking at carotid plaque deposition in the arteries. They're looking at bone remodeling. They're going to look at lipid clearance. So it's not just symptom suppression. We're really starting to go back to say, hey, maybe like 100 years ago, we actually had it right when we saw HRT as preventative medicine. Can we get back to that, please? And so that's, kind of what's behind a lot of this. But, this wasn't doctors operating in some back dark secret room. This was accepted medical practice. And then, they kind of got shut out from the conversation.
That's another thing. I mean, I just can't recommend this book enough. I just love the historical context of even it wasn't just Western medicine, it was Chinese medicine, doing all of this. And I think sometimes we think, evolution, like evolution's happening and there's progress. And it's like, that doesn't always, those are two assumptions, right? There's a lot of ways that the times we're living in aren't the most advanced, I guess is what it's kind of the TLDR of that statement. So one of the things though, I think is really interesting that you get into in your book is like a lot of this stuff, because when you typically take HRT, they're like, we treat the symptoms, right? So like when I first started, it was like with progesterone, my sleep got better. And then I wasn't sleeping so well. And my doctor was like, oh, we'll up your dose, right? But these things that you're talking about, bone remodeling, your arteries getting hard, your, dementia risks, all that stuff, you can't really know. So like, you don't feel that per se. I mean, I'm assuming you don't. And so if someone wanted to experiment with rhythmic dosing and this approach, because I'm really curious about it, especially I think anyone who's gone through early menopause like me, it's almost like a no-brainer, right? But how would they know that it's quote unquote working if you're not able to feel like, oh, do I feel differently on this? Do I not? What are your thoughts on that?
Well, that's a challenging question. I think that's the first time we've been asked that. I mean, I would just push back a little. Do you know that you're getting those protections from your patch and kind of daily static progesterone? And you bring up a really good point, Allie. We cannot feel the lining of our arteries becoming stiff. We cannot perceive the deposition of tau protein in the brain. We do know that these processes are happening. And in terms of feeling these things, well, not these things per se, but just, an avalanche or, a pile up of symptoms. Speak to the women that are around. Give them 62, 63 years. Give them about 10 or maybe 12 years post-menopause, and they're feeling a lot. I will tell you, again, I'm going to kind of answer around that, but I will tell you that for Kristin and I, unless we achieve a certain level of estradiol in the blood, we will absolutely feel symptoms. So symptoms are, we don't want, we do decry sort of like the doctors that just use HRT to manage symptoms. That's just limited. Okay. And because women want to feel good, like that's part of the whole journey of aging is we should feel good. We just like to say it's symptoms plus like looking at whatever research we currently do have that says we need to get approximately this level in the blood. And then, but what's happening, and I think we saw something recent that was like 20 years old, Kristin, that was saying, you're not going to get those benefits till you reach about 100 picograms.
It was 150 actually. Yeah. And it was like a 1996 study.
For argument's sake, let's just say it's 100. Okay. So here's the thing. You measure the blood estradiol level of a woman on, say, a mid-dose patch of 0.05. Highly unusual that you're going to even get above, say, a 50 picogram level. Out of 50 picograms, looking at most, I looked at a lab range the other day. It was a little different. They do vary, but there was a lab range that showed the postmenopausal range of estrogen from like around 0 or 5 up to about 54.7. So you're basically, a lot of women on their HRT therapies are being maintained in a postmenopausal state. They're not getting any protection. So
I just think that's important for people to know, even if you can't, quote unquote, measure it in physiological rhythmic doses, you also, who's looking at it like it's on these other doses, right? Like I'm just assuming I'm getting heart protection. That's part of why I went on estrogen, right? It's like, I don't know what the radiation and chemo did to my heart. So I'm like, oh, I want this insurance. But it's a false sense of insurance is what I'm hearing you say, unless you're measuring and making sure you're absorbing and you talk about in the book, like the first couple years you're working with the provider, you should be tested and followed.
Yeah. I would say don't, like you might use the word experiment. I would say HRT is not a DIY. Nobody should be suddenly being like, I'm going to start cycling my progesterone. You need physician oversight. We do love good, nuanced, deeply skilled, highly trained HRT providers. Unfortunately, a lot of the talking heads are out there don't hit any of those boxes. And they're just an HRT provider. And remember, you can be an HRT provider as long as you got a script pad. That doesn't make you a good, person to go to. But I would say, we need to start taking responsibility for our health, to be perfectly frank. Like direct-to-consumer labs exist all over most of 50 states in the country. Go measure your lipids regularly. Go look at your thyroid regularly. Go look at your inflammatory markers regularly. Go look at your iron regularly. You don't even have to know which markers to pull. A lot of these direct-to-consumer, even Quest and LabCorp, you can go in and say, I want the iron panel. And, they get the markers for you. So I would say, one, ladies, you need to be responsible for your own stuff. I don't care how functional your doctor is and how many letters they have after their name. It's still your responsibility to oversee these things. So that's one. And then two, kind of the, how do I know, we need to be careful with using symptoms as the benchmark for these things, because as women, we normalize a lot. Right. And so you've got a lot of women who are on suboptimal HRT. They're on like a 0.25 or 0.025 or 0.05 patch. Maybe they're taking a little Prometrium and they're like, yeah, I'm good. Got rid of my hot flashes and I'm not, staying up all night. Maybe I only wake up once a night or something like that, and so they kind of couch everything as because it's better than it was, that then it's good enough and it's okay. And they think that their joints aching, it must be osteoarthritis, right? Or they think that their, bladder leakage is maybe because they had 3 babies. And this is where Maria and I want to go, stop gaslighting yourself. These things all did sort of get worse for all of us through the 40s and the 50s. Therefore, maybe we look at the hormonal component at play and we stop sort of living with good enough and we live with thriving. Maria and I are like bound and determined to be doing amazing things in our 80s. That's kind of the goal here, and I think we owe that to ourselves because as women, we sort of persist in incredibly difficult environments, taking care of careers and families and parents and all of these things. This is the time of life we take care of ourselves. And it doesn't mean being selfish and it doesn't mean shirking any other responsibilities, but it does mean making a commitment to yourself to be really healthy. And we're of the opinion that that's going to include some really good HRT.
Yeah, I love that you brought that up because I know people listening, a lot of them like raising kids or caring aging parents. And I loved in your book, you talked about inertia, right? Like around taking care of ourselves. Because I feel like I want to get on, and I meant experiment, not like do it yourself, but like try it and then see like that sense of it, right? But that inertia, and I'm someone who's like totally type A about my health, given my health history and the hole I've gotten myself out of several times, from infertility to early menopause to IBS, all this stuff. But I think so many women who come to my programs, I work with people on their relationship to food and consistency and nutrition. it's like, oh, I'm finally doing this for me. Right. And I think that you bring up that point. Like, this is a time where that's non-negotiable, I think, if you want to age well. And it can be hard if you're not sleeping and all this stuff. But I'm glad you plugged that, because I think, I was reading because I take Prometrium, and it's like, in the book, you're talking about like the dyes in it. And I'm like, I make sure my son gets none of this shit, but then I'm taking it in Prometrium every night. Not today, Satan. Booking a call with Maria and Kristin, because this is like, I don't want him, because I'm like, oh, his body's so young, it's more toxic, but it's like, my body's getting insulin sensitive. It's aging, it's like the same, like the opposite end of the bell curve. So I'm glad that you said that. And so much of the reason I created my model the way I did is it's rooted in developmental psychology, so that people realize, look, no one has all your answers, because it's so easy. Like, I have clients that are like, I went to my doctor and they don't want to do this, they don't want to do that. I'm like, I know it's annoying, but you got to find a new doctor. Like, you're not wrong. And I'm trying to teach them that they may have gone to medical school, but that doesn't mean that they're an expert in necessarily wellness, right? Western medicine tends to be an expert in disease management. And we're just at this interesting inflection point where, if you are, because I think so many people listening to this podcast are paying attention and they're trying to do the right thing. And it can be like, ugh. But one of the tips that I love that you gave people is, I'm going to quote from your book. You say, and you kind of mentioned this, Kristin, a good HRT provider is not just about finding any provider willing to give you HRT. Start with choosing what type of HRT you want to meet your goals, then find a provider aligned with you. And then you offer some provider discernment clues in the book, which I love, when they say bioidentical as a marketing term, because I've heard that. And they offer statins, SSRIs, or sleep meds as a first approach. I love that you flip that. Like, that's kind of the leadership that I'm trying to, even though it's about, I work with my clients around like, food and everything, the underpinnings are, you've got to take the lead. You've got to lead. So I love that you give that, like, read their book, everyone, and then you'll get a sense of the lay of the land. And then you can align to find a practitioner who will support you. That's what you're saying, right?
Well, let's underscore that. You actually just said something that we're really, really passionate about. And we do work with physicians, and we have a wonderfully kind of over 6 or more years now curated list of doctors that we refer clients to, who work with us, who have worked on their health, who've prepared themselves to be as healthy a host as possible, looking at gut health, nutrition, mindset, managing expectations. But, we do often happens about once a week, maybe every other week. We have women who are like, can you give me a referral for an HRT doctor? Because people know, non-clients who ask it. We get emails and Instagram messages, and when I had the time, I used to answer people, but I still do try to answer people. But the bottom line is, it's like, okay, well, what do you want HRT wise? I don't know. I'm like, oh, okay, well, you need to know that. What are your goals for HRT? Do you want to just be symptom free? Do you want to, are you willing to bring back a cycle? Do you understand the implications of that? And then that's when you get to look for a provider, not before.
Yeah, I love that you have that, because I don't know, it's just putting the ball in someone's court versus kind of like
We get a little hate. We get a little hate. I had a woman who said, well, this is what the doctor should know. And I'm like, oh, no, you really do. You need a level of involvement. Because, again, yes, the HRT doctor will know their method or two. What if that's pellets? What if that's, birth control? Because you know what? You're 52 and still menstruating. So we're not going to give you real bioidentical HRT. We're going to put you on the birth control pill until you stop menstruating, which is, we'll never really know.
Allie, you have to see it as an RD. Like, how many people honestly still believe that their doctor can give them good nutrition advice, right? And sadly, they still go to them for that. And I'm like, I get it. We're not discounting what they've done. They've amassed unbelievable knowledge. They've put incredible investment, both personal, financial, sacrifice time. Like, doctors are amazing. We love doctors. but know what they're capable of. And unfortunately, in the US in particular, we have such a siloed medical, kind of construct that sadly, your OBGYN is about as equipped to give you menopause advice as your orthopedic is to give you nutrition advice. And so we just need to kind of accept the fact that we're not demonizing doctors, but this whole menopause space, because of the control of medical societies, because of the control of the FDA, because of the control of pharmaceutical companies, because of the control of the insurance regulatory platform, et cetera, they are hogtied as to what they even know about menopause hormones and HRT. And so you probably have to opt out of the system a little bit. And I can hear it already. People are going to be like, oh, Kristin, that's so privileged, blah, 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 blah. There are perfectly fine ways to get low cost, effective HRT if you know how to look for it and you understand what you're seeking. So we kind of push back, and many insurances will pay for HRT. They don't necessarily pay for compounded, all of them. Some do, shockingly. But, there's a process, and you have to own that. You can't just go to the person who delivered your babies and think that she or he are equipped to carry you into your 80s. They're two completely different things. So, we kind of want to push back on this whole I just want to trust my doctor. We're not saying don't trust your doctor. Just don't trust them with things they're not capable of knowing.
Yeah. And just for the record, I'm actually not an RD. I considered that path, but I found the conflicts of interest too great. I didn't want to spend more money. So I've been, in fact, reading your book, Reignited, when I first left my corporate job, I've been doing this for 17 years, but part of what motivated me was such the political and corporate corruption. I was like, how do people not know this? And I've kind of gotten tired over the years, and I'm like, all right, I'm so grateful. I know how to navigate things, but it's been less and less of kind of, but your book got me to be like, yes, people need to know this. So one of the things I want to talk about is as we age, weight can really snowball for many reasons, right? Especially stress. When you see that someone would stand to benefit from weight loss because of their testing, their health markers, how do you approach this conversation in a way that makes it about the physiological realities versus a potential failing or a shame-induced conversation?
Yeah, most women don't put on weight, unfortunately, without kind of some mistakes along the way. It doesn't mean that they should have known better. That's not what we're saying. But we also then, they overlook things like hormonal decline affects our gut microbiome. Our gut microbiome is heavily influential on our metabolic health, our fat deposition, our, where we're going to put weight, but also how much weight we're going to put on, et cetera. So we try and just educate, right? A really empowered woman is an informed woman, and she needs education. So we try and say, forget about why you're in this spot to begin with, trying to unpack all of that and understand the stresses of life and, things that were thrown at us and whatnot. It's kind of like slamming your head against the wall. There's really not a lot of point to that. So now we want to say, okay, what can we do, right? What is within our control? And the reality is we do make daily choices every single day, 3 times a day in particular, that matter. We have 21 opportunities each week to sort of get things right. Do we need to be perfect? No, but we do need to practice, and we do need to kind of aim for progress. That's all we try and do. But where are the hormones at relevant here is, as we lose our estradiol, we start to change how we are able to utilize carbohydrates in the gut. That brings on insulin resistance. Now, whether you get fully insulin resistant or not, you are lower in your tolerance to carbohydrates. A lot of women don't want to give up their carbohydrates. We're not saying you have to go low carb or extreme low carb. We're not saying you have to go carnivore, but you do need to recognize that you probably have to do things differently than you did in your 30s and 40s. That's just sort of an unfortunate reality, but the sooner we start to accept that, the sooner we can kind of unpack some of this weight that we're carrying. Looking at stress is huge. Women, we've seen women who are, 4'11" and 200 pounds. That scares us from a metabolic standpoint. And we, really dive in and get in the trenches with them. But then we get their food journal, and they're drinking a cup of coffee with a scoop of collagen and maybe a chicken breast the rest of the day. And that's it. So these are moments where we say, okay, that's almost impossible. not to say we don't believe you, but to say there's something else going on. So do we need to look into past trauma? And I know some people might roll their eyes. Maria and I aren't skilled in, unpacking trauma, and we would refer someone out. But that is a reality, unfortunately, whether we like to hear about it or not. That is a reality. What the body holds onto and, sort of is harboring, we need to free it of those things. And so whether it's stress, I mean, I know that at one point I had a kid leaving for college, a kid who was in college, who was dealing with some health issues, and a younger kid who was getting what was going to be a life or death diagnosis. And that same day that we were waiting for his diagnosis, my dad calls to tell me he has terminal cancer. Like, talk about stress, right? And I could have starved myself, and I guarantee you I would have packed on pounds. We as women think I must have done something wrong. It's like, no, just life happens. And so we need to sort of start to kind of realize there are things that happen that are out of our control that may have led to weight gain, but there are things in our control that can sort of blunt that weight gain. And so, for me, it was choosing how I was going to kind of surrender up this stress. And, Maria and I are very Christian women. And so, we rely on a higher power for some of these things, but, making sure I was getting outside and getting sunlight. It's easy to lie in bed when you're super depressed and things aren't working well for you, It's easy to sort of tell yourself, well, I've got all this weight on me. I might as well enjoy the dessert sort of thing, and we got to get rid of that might as well sort of concept. And so there's just, every woman is different. Any woman struggling with weight gain has a unique recipe or mixture that got her to that place. And so you really need a provider who's willing to sort of step back, help you kind of unpack some of these things and then look into them. But at the end of the day, the strategies start to be all the same. We need to be intentional with what we're eating, and we need to move our bodies. And we need to sort of, blunt the stress. Those three things we need to have happen. So the weight piece, Maria and I hate it when people are like, I've gained 10 pounds and I really want HRT. We're like, whoa, 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 whoa. That's not is the same thing, so we just try and say, we get it. We understand aesthetics, but health is really more important. So let's get you healthy. Whatever the scale says, we'll let it say. Most women find that once they sort of focus on health and stop focusing on the scale, some of that internal stress starts to let things fall a little bit.
I mean, the research shows the more that you just focus on weight, the harder it is to lose, right? That's paradox, right? So much of my work is getting people to unlearn, that food is only about weight, and it can be medicine, but it is also joy. And what are the stressful reasons they're turning to food? So I love that you navigate that, because I was just meeting up with a friend who's in the midlife space as well. I mean, she's more around like self-leadership like me, but we were talking about how the conversation, again, it's become polarized. Like, it's either diet culture, or she's like, some people I feel like are advocating for obesity. My work is so much also about clients untangling their worth from their weight so that they can actually look at it like logically, instead of so like, oh, this is because I'm not disciplined or because I don't have willpower. It's like, no, there's physiologic realities. And I think people's ears are going to perk up when you're like, wait, when you're not eating enough, you gain weight. And so people don't even understand really holistically how weight gain happens is kind of the first thing. So I'm glad that you brought that up. You did bring up stress, and I know, and a lot of people who come to this podcast, they've recently gotten sober, and now they're turning to sugar or something. And there's a lot of evidence that women's drinking increases dramatically in midlife. And in your book, you say you have to pick your hormones or your alcohol. Can you delve into that a little bit?
Yeah. So alcohol is a risk for breast cancer, and alcohol takes up real estate in your liver. Right. And so by that, so any hormones that we take, it doesn't have to just be oral estrogen, but hormones will eventually get processed by the liver. This is not a bad thing at all, but why would you put stress on the liver by making it also have to detoxify alcohol? Why would you? It's a pretty well-known risk factor that alcohol increases breast cancer risk. Okay. But also what increases breast cancer risk, not hormone therapy, but is just being a female and growing older. And then we also lose a critical enzyme needed, or it reduces as we age, alcohol dehydrogenase, to process that alcohol efficiently, adequately. So you've got like a deck stacked against you for sure as you are aging and drinking alcohol. It's dehydrating. It's bad on the skin. I'll appeal to vanity. It's just There's just so many reasons why not to have it. Sleep, everything, gives you the munchies, so it's choose one or the other. And again, the kind of whole choose one or the other with HRT or alcohol is, again, you're working that liver. That's not a bad thing when it comes to HRT, but it is kind of a bad thing when it comes to alcohol. So.
Thanks for saying that, because it's recently come out more and more how these studies that alcohol was healthy were funded by big beverage. What do we call them? So I'm glad you brought that up. Okay, so we covered a lot of ground today. And two final questions is, where do you think we are headed in this menopause conversation as it matures?
Menopause is really big business. And I think that we're distracting women with the shiny objects. The supplement market is huge. We've got doctors who label their own supplements and kind of sell them alongside this messaging about menopause. And so women think they're essential and required to go through these things with or without HRT. They want the supplements. Now we've seen venture capital get behind menopause with femtech and creating these online telemedicine platforms that are doling out HRT like Tic Tacs. And, the unfortunate thing is they're not developing really a true patient relationship. You really need to have a doctor who's asking you, are you pooping? How's your energy? Are you sleeping, et cetera? And these aren't, they're often looking at labs or talking to the patient or the woman, and that's it. And then we still have doctors who are saying, okay, HRT is good, but by the way, we never need to test you. That one's really confusing. We would never tell a diabetic that we're never going to look at their insulin. So why are we going to tell a woman we're not going to look at what her hormone levels are? They're both incredibly powerful hormones. So I think there's a lot of future awareness that's happening. I think there's going to be more self-advocacy. I think that we need to support the organizations that are sort of, I don't want to use the word pioneering, but in this landscape, it feels like pioneering what used to be the approach to menopause care, which was to provide hormones to prevent diseases of aging. And, women need to just get smart and demand more and better from their doctors. Unfortunately, the landscape right now is a lot of doctors have discovered social media. And whether it's TikTok or Instagram, they're putting themselves out there as these experts, and women are yet again falling prey to blindly following whatever they're telling them to do. That's where Maria and I just kind of have concerns about where we're headed as the future, because until women are willing to put their big girl pants on, learn for themselves. And it might mean consuming 5 different books. It might mean listening to this podcast and listening to someone who says that what we say is dangerous. We don't care. Consume it all, get informed, and then decide what you want and demand that from a provider. Because if we continue down this path of providers repackaging themselves as your girlfriend who's going to usher you through menopause, and women just sort of fall in line, that's not going to end up advancing the ball. And so I think that's kind of our concern. I don't know, Maria, if you want to add to that at all.
Yeah, I think we're going to probably see a little bit more of a proliferation of what Kristin said, which is the femtech platforms and kind of the doctor guru menopause experts who, by the way, generally tend to keep women at low levels, but women love them because they're very about, they're teaching about HRT, they're raising awareness to that. We say that's good, but in our opinion, they don't really go far enough. They're still very kind of adherent to medical society talking points, which are, again, they are maybe advancing, the cause forward to a certain degree, but we think they're falling short. So.
Because they've got pharmaceutical capture. I mean, at the end of the day, yeah. The pharmaceutical capture is always going to keep a lid on how much progress we actually see out of this movement until women start to get mad, stomp their feet a little bit, and say, either you give me what I want, or I'm going to find someone else. Because doctors like to have more patients or more money. So if women, kind of start to dangle their desires in front of these doctors and demand better, maybe that's going to do it. I think grassroots, usually wins every time. So it's going to take all of us ladies to make the change, not doctors who cater to ladies to make the change.
Thank you for that. And for everyone listening, I would just recommend looking at how long someone's been in this space too. because I see this with functional medicine again, and I loved functional medicine when I first found it. And now I see it as a tool, not the answer. But you can see someone who, just got into functional medicine and then they're promoting this stuff that I'm like, what? And it's like, oh, okay. And everyone has to start somewhere. But I just think for listeners, think about people, how long they've been in the space, because I've seen some doctors turn into quote unquote menopause experts. And I'm like, I feel like I know a little bit more than you and I don't know that much. Like I'm new here. You know what I mean? So just because someone has an MD at the end of their name, don't think of that automatically as this is the answer, capital T.
Or 100,000 followers,
Yeah. Oh, that's
or
right.
a podcast, or a supplement line, or, yeah, that we need to be really careful sort of extrapolating skill and depth and knowledge from reach. And that's, good and bad about social media. It's getting awareness, but it's also sort of repackaging people as having depth in a field that they're quite new to. And you can see it, even Maria and I love to push back. We have doctors who will be like, this study says this. Why haven't women been told this? And it's a great rallying cry, right? It makes women think like, she's on my side. Until Maria and I point out, yeah, but that study was dated 2003 and you've ignored it for 21 years, right? Those of us in this space a little bit longer knew about that study. We haven't been ignoring it. We've been trying to extol its virtues, but you've, told us to sort of sit down. So it's definitely a difficult landscape to navigate. We will acknowledge that. We're not saying trust us. We're just saying be smart in whom you follow, understand kind of what they've got behind it. If they're hooked up with Gwyneth Paltrow and doing, summits in Manhattan, maybe they're not actually in the clinic, in the trenches, dealing with women.
Yeah. And one thing I loved about your book was you really explain studies and how they're run, and then you list a bunch. So again, you're empowering the reader, the woman, to be like, wait a second, I can go in here with more confidence because I have probably read more studies if you read your book than maybe perhaps some of the providers. So thank you for that. So we've covered a lot of ground today. And I know, other than, of course, someone going out and getting your book, and we'll link to it in the show notes, what do you think is the first step for someone to increase what you call in your book your health span, not just your lifespan?
Your daily choices are going to be your number one lowest hanging fruit and biggest lever that we all have. Starting to kind of live authentically in this modern world is a challenge, but something that I think we're all up to the task, right? This morning, I did not have a good night's sleep. My husband left at crack of stupid in order to go play in a golf tournament. And I was like, God, I could just lie here for a while and scroll on my phone. And I'm like, and if you do that, Chris, you're going to sleep for crap tomorrow night too. So it was up out of bed with the dogs, go out in the yard, etc. We're not going to be the ones advocating ever for the cold plunging sauna, red light waving, et cetera, et cetera. There are really basic things that women can start doing, which is eating whole unprocessed foods, nourishing your body, eating enough food, eating optimal amounts of protein. And we explain why in the book for those of you who still are kind of like, I don't know, everyone's saying eat high protein. I don't get it. We'll give you an explanation why. But that's a basic thing. And we, no one's shoving food into our mouth. We're picking up that fork, right? So make intentional choices with that. Start to recognize the light cycle of our day and how it affects our energy, our mood, our sleep, etc. Start to honor that. Stop eating dinner at 8:30 at night, for goodness sakes. I don't care how late summertime has late sun. That's not what your body is sensing. Recognize your stress, embrace it. I mean, you went through something incredibly challenging with a cancer diagnosis. That's something that, most people fear. Okay, well, maybe there's something behind taking empowerment from, that risk, right? What can you do? Put down your glass of wine. You're really scared about breast cancer? Why are you still drinking wine and doing, margs and nachos on the weekend? Like, there's just, women have so much more in their control to age healthfully than they're willing to recognize. And we get it. It's a lot of work. Women will say it takes so much time and it's expensive. And we're like, no doubt, but so is illness. right? Illness is more expensive and more time consuming and whatnot. So I think, starting to kind of step back and ask yourself a really realistic question. Do I do what I possibly can each day with basic tools? Again, not the MitoPure supplements, not the saunas and whatnot. Basic daily choices. Are you doing enough with those? And then when and if your hormones, or I should say not if, because we all lose our hormones, but when they are gone or if they are already gone, understand what that might mean to you in terms of your long-term prospects and, get educated and decide what you want to do.
I'll bring in a slightly additional side. I think like community, connection with others, sense of purpose, nature, breaking bread, gathering with people, and getting off the damn phone.
She's not wrong. And I think that community and mindset piece is something that Maria and I have come to recognize is so important. And it's why, we have a private client group that's an online kind of community. No, it's not Facebook for anyone listening. It's a very closed private network. And recently we've started doing retreats. And these aren't like, woo woo, we're all going to do a sound bath retreat and talk about our feelings. This is just get together with women in a place that's outside your normal environment, have some really good food, take some walks, listen to some things together and connect, because it's a natural, unfortunate transition in this time period to become isolated as women. We don't want to talk about the things that are happening to us. Some of us might find them somewhat embarrassing, or we feel a little bit shame behind them. Maybe your relationship's starting to struggle, etc. That's not uncommon, but it doesn't have to be that way. And when you're able to connect with other women going through this, it's incredibly sort of like not just empowering, but sort of lifts the burden off of you. So I think Maria's points on that are really, really important.
I love that you bring that up, because my work is all about belonging and how we actually turn to food, because food is coupled with attachment. And so as adults, when we're stressed, what we really need is belonging and community. So I love that you brought that up, because it's so primal. But in America, especially where we're this like independent, where we value independence, it can be an easy thing to forget. So, or not take seriously. So I love that you brought that up. And I just also, another plug for the book, if you're someone spending like you think health is expensive because you're buying all these supplements, read their book and find out what supplements actually will be interfering with your HRT. So this is about, a lot of times it's expensive because we're wasting money. So I just want to add that a lot of times. So
Maria, do you want to make the one plug for the one supplement that so many women are taking while on HRT?
So DIM, diindole methane, a lot of women are told that they need to be on it to kind of make sure that their estrogen goes down the healthy pathway, or to just keep it safe. And, it's going to, and especially, Allie, considering that most women are on lower dose therapies, the DIM is kind of blunting that and maybe just reducing that. So sort of like they're paying for their estrogen, they're paying for the DIM, and it's not a good outcome. It's lowering the level. So yeah. Now, it does have a use, DIM, but you really have to know why you're using it. So, and again, it's things like we get into these details in the book.
Wonderful. So is there anything that we haven't covered, or you're surprised you haven't been asked yet, that you want to share before we close?
You asked some pretty good questions. I mean, I will share that we actually haven't covered this, but I will share, Kristin and I do mentor people. It was, so we work with clients, but we also mentor other professionals. We're working with a group of nurse practitioners now, health coaches, dietitians, nutritionists, physical therapists. So we mentor them we have a program that focuses on midlife women's health, and we teach all about HRT and metabolic health and how to coach midlife women. So we only do that twice a year. So
that's actually how I found you. My sleep coach, Kelly Murray, posted about you. So that's how I actually found, and a lot of practitioners and providers listen to this podcast. So I'm glad that you mentioned that.
Awesome.
Yeah. Anything Kristin, you want to add?
No, I think Maria covered it. I mean, working with us, we're going to try and increase our offerings, recognizing that, some women don't want testing, or they don't want a group situation, or they just want the information. And, so we've got some new things coming out for women about that. But otherwise, just again, take it slow, consume the information, and, whether it's us or anyone else, just make your own decisions. You really need to be your own advocate in this one. We're not prescriptive with anything that we tell our ladies to do. And I would say anyone who's kind of prescriptive about how you look at HRT and what you do needs to maybe be pushed off to the side.
Those are the people I trust the most, paradoxically. The people who say, don't trust us. Those are the people that I trust. Okay, so again, everyone, and we'll have links to this in the show notes, but the book is The Great Menopause Myth, The Truth on Mastering Midlife Hormonal Mayhem, Beating Uncomfortable Symptoms and Aging to Thrive. And, one of the things we're always talking on this podcast is about how to think about food outside of weight. And I think this book does such a great job of really getting you to care about your health. Sometimes that includes weight, but it also transcends weight. And I just think this book I wish it came out 4 years prior, although I don't know if I would have known to look for it. But for anyone who wants to save money, time, and their health span, I just can't recommend it. So thank you for making the time, even though you're really busy, to come here to write the book and do all the things that go with a book. So thank you for your work.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you.